Yeah, I have to wonder, certainly, and especially because they do seemingly try to hide themselves.
Hmm.
If if they were coming from another planet, based on how often we see UFOs, there should be some sort of super highway, or we constantly see them coming and going.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Down to Earth with me, Kristian Harloff. It's UAP Tuesday. And since I moved over the UAP Tuesday show to this channel, I have been doing more so just like the news pieces every day, and I've been doing less of guests. You know, in the past, whether it was Timothy Gallaudet, Jesse Michaels, uh, Danny Sheehan, the list goes on and on about the people that we had on there. And I wanted to go more into the news pieces. But then recently, was given the opportunity to have a conversation here with Dr. Michael Masters, and he's done so many great things. He's speaking of Jesse Michaels. He's been on Jesse Michaels' show. He's been on Ross Coulthard's show. He's been on tons, and he's been very open, and he's talking about his experiences. He is the one, if you didn't know, the first time I was aware of him was on Jesse Michaels' show with the hypothesis, the UAP hypothesis about whether or not these beings could be from the future, humans. And it's always fascinating me. If you watch what Riley and I used to talk about, and we don't know how physics works, we don't know quantum realm, we don't know all that stuff, and you just go about your day in the way that you do it, and you think, oh yeah, that's just I wake up in the morning, I have some breakfast, I go to work, I go to sleep, and that's the way the world works. And it's not. That's the way we made our world work, but we don't really know. So this hypothesis was really interesting, and how open he's been about it. And his books that he has are highly recommended, whether it's Identified Flying Objects, the Extraterrestrial Model, Revelation, The Future Human Past is a novel, a science fiction novel that he wrote. So I just want to have a conversation with the dude, and I'm going to do it right now. So please welcome to the show, everybody, Dr. Michael Masters. How are you, sir?
Good, good. How are you doing today?
I'm good, man. So just so you know, I don't know how familiar you are with this channel, my work, whatever. Too, I am not one of these people that was so like diving into it, reading every little thing, like for the last like 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
I stumbled upon a documentary. I've always been interested in it, fascinated with it. I always thought it was naive to think that we're the only things here, but I
Sure.
stumbled upon a documentary, and it was called UFOs Investigating the Unknown. And what I liked about it was that it dove into the idea of the military aspect and these people who have seen these things, and whether it's people like yourself, scientists, and who really dove deeper into it. And I'm like, well, and the New York Times article obviously woke me up to this stuff as well. But I've just been since then. I don't find, and this is what I really want to dive into with you. I don't find things to be coincidences anymore. I find things
Hmm.
more so where it was like, okay, I'm paying attention to all this stuff, and now within that time when I started to covering it, the David Grush stuff happens, and it pops up, and the hearings happen, and all these different things start happening. So, have you felt, because I've discovered through this last year of discovering this, I bring up John Mack all the time, and what he went through during his time, and basically, and you've spoken pretty open about this. This hasn't happened to you, but the idea that when you're talking about this so openly, the threat of your job being taken away, or your credibility being hurt, because his certainly was, and he was
Yeah.
defended. But does that stuff ever come in when you start talking about this in the beginning?
Well, I was certainly worried about that. Not gonna lie, I was kind of a little uneasy about coming out talking about this, but I felt compelled to write this book all the way back in 2012, and then worked on it for about 7 years. Had a couple of research assistants who helped me out with some of the background research and just kind of structuring things. And then, yeah, about probably a year before I started talking publicly about this, I went to the chair of my department and said, "Hey, just a heads up in case there's any backlash or anything that could sort of affect you and affect the department. But I'm writing this book exploring whether UFOs could be future humans coming back through time. And he made this kind of cocked his head, made this weird look on his face, and then said, "That's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing, asking questions like that." And then turned and just walked away. And I was like, all right, well, at least this guy's on my side.
Yeah, that's all you
Who
need.
knows what'll happen? Yeah, who knows what'll happen the rest of the way up the
Yeah.
chain of command at my university? But he was on board. And then, honestly, there was a viral news story that came out about that first book that a local reporter did. John Amy is his name with KXLF, and he took it seriously. He said this is the part in the story where the commentator cracks a joke about little green men, but the AA tip program was just the information about that was just released. He cited the 2017 New York Times article, so he took it seriously, and a lot of people respected him taking it seriously, and it just sort of blew up. Fox News picked it up, and the chancellor of my department shook my hand when I went up to get my 10-year service award and said, "Hey, I saw that story in Fox News today. It's great." And I was like, well, all right, from the chair all the way up to the chancellor is good, I guess. So, no, I haven't really had backlash, but I'm certainly always worried about that. And certainly John Mack did. He had to fight for his job constantly at Harvard. So I feel fortunate. I think a big thing is just trying to do this in a way that is grounded, scientific, and logical.
Well, it also seems, and I think that when believe, and maybe you'll disagree with me, but I feel like you'll be on the same page that it's been beneficial to you over the last year, 2 years, even when that New York Times article did come out, that it's still taboo, but it's not as taboo even in the slightest, and that you can
Yeah.
approach this. And I assume that you and I are close into the same generation also, where it's like with the curiosity is there. Look, pop culture and movies shapes a lot of this stuff too, right? Like this. I just covered a story on Friday about a book that came out, I guess, in 2020, talking about Spielberg and talking about what his particular thoughts were, and his thoughts seem to echo what you wrote in your paper, and the fact that this is what he believes. Now, he didn't necessarily say this. This is what was said that he said in a book, but still, that
Okay. Yeah.
his belief is that they are future humans. And even if you look at Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that scene
Yeah.
at the end when the pilots come out, that's kind of like his little tip of the cap, if you will. And he had Hynek on set.
Mhm.
He had Jacques Vallée on set. So is it also at this time where we're at in the culture that you think that it is almost a bit hip to be talking about what you're talking about at the moment?
Yeah, I do. It seems like there's a lot of folks jumping on board, taking it seriously. Part of that, yeah, may just be that UFOs are hot and they're trying to cash in on whatever publicity or promotional aspects come with talking about it. But I also kind of get the sense that there's a shift in our cultural zeitgeist where, yeah, like you said, it's just something we can talk about now. It's out there. It's potentially one of the biggest questions of our time, potentially for all of humanity. So yeah, why wouldn't we be talking about this? And yeah, it's great. A lot of it is shaped by pop culture. Science fiction allows us to explore things in different ways, but there's also kind of been an ebb and flow. Like you go back to the late 1800s with the Society for Psychical Research, even Darwin's, at the same time Darwin was publishing on the origin of species, Alfred Russel Wallace was working on the same theory of evolution by means of natural selection. He was part of this group, really well respected naturalist, scientist, and he's studying mediumship and spirits and all of these things that at that time were still fringe science, but people were more open to it. And then we kind of slammed the door on that, went back to this reductionist, materialist, really hard science approach that dismisses all of those things as impossible. And now I think we're kind of the pendulum swinging back, and we're starting to take those things seriously and recognize, just have some basic humility to realize we don't know everything. And there's a lot of stuff out there that's happening that's real, but we just don't understand it yet. But instead of pushing it aside and saying that's impossible, we're starting to take it seriously and keep an open mind, which is great to see.
It's super great to see, and I think that one of the things, and this is what a lot of people look, politicians get, rightfully so, sometimes get a really bad rap, right? But I think what the important thing, I covered a lot what's going on in Congress and what's going on with them fighting for whether it's hearings, whether it's the the Schumer and Rounds bill, whatever it might be, and how important that is. And I think that one of the things that's really important that I mention on this channel all the time that I feel is neglectful is the way that the mainstream media really covers this subject. Because sure, you'll get people, and look, I think what Ross Coulthart is doing for News Nation is extraordinary, and I think really great. And had it not been for his report with David Grush, I don't know if we get the kind of mainstream or people talking about it in the way that they are had that interview not taken place. But when it comes to, you mentioned before, Fox News had done that piece on you, but there's not a lot of coverage on the daily from whether it's Fox News, whether it's CNN, MSNBC, whoever it is, because you're right. This is the biggest story in the history of human nature. If it tends to be, especially for what your theory has, that's the case, from technology basis, from evolution, from all that type of stuff. And the idea that even if there's any of these reports that they're not covering on the news, do you think that the taboo inside of mainstream media will change eventually?
Well, I think so, yes, and I think it is to some extent already. Yeah, Ross with News Nation. News Nation in general seems to be more open to this and talking about it more openly, which is great. Who knows what their motivation is, if it's a ratings thing, or if the executive producer of some of these shows has seen a UFO or been abducted or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is cool that they're doing it. Fox also is to some extent, but it's really just those two. You don't hear anything. NPR, PBS is completely off topic with this. BBC kind of touches on a little randomly, but yeah, where's CBS, NBC? But it has changed. We had a paper come out. Gosh, I guess it was about 2 months ago, about crypto terrestrials, and that was sort of an interesting litmus test because I was invited on to some more mainstream programs. CBS did a story out of Boston on this and and aired it, and even the thing I did with Ross too. They did a featured piece on News Nation, sort of promoting that. I went on Fox and Friends reluctantly to talk about it as soon as that paper came out, and then some Jesse Waters primetime thing later. So, yeah, I mean, those are, I guess, like the mainstream for Fox, but where's everybody else?
Right.
And I think until we can get these other networks and these other media outlets paying attention and taking it seriously, yeah, we're not going to really bring everybody into the conversation. But I do see change. I do see it being taken seriously. And a lot of these radio shows and TV shows I did about that paper, it was sensationalized. They would kind of play me in with, X-Files music on occasion. But then the conversations shifted and they really did ask informed questions. They were taking it seriously. It was a really grounded conversation in each instance. So, excuse me, that's been good to see, but that needs to happen on a massive scale to really move the conversation forward and bring everybody into it.
What does that? What was it going to be? Because I'm curious. Where I don't know about the Rounds and Schumer bill, whether it's the Soul Foundation. When I talked to Tim Gallaudet a little while, probably about a year ago, 6-7 months ago, and at the time when I had him on, the Soul Foundation had done these videos, and when they shot the videos, the Schumer and Rounds bill had not been kind of gutted in the way that it eventually was, and they were very hopeful that it was going to get passed in its form, and they shot these presentations as if it was going to pass, and everything kind of was determined on. And then whether it was January with Jeremy Corbell or James Fox, or just people or tweeting out, or even Lou Elizondo tweeting out saying 2024, January 2024, this is when it's going to start to shift. This is when all the big information, and here we are in almost September, and it doesn't seem, well, in mainstream side of it, it doesn't seem like the needle is being moved that much yet. Guys, thanks for watching the show. Really appreciate you being here, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to hear about somebody I love, and that's Factor. Factor, to me, the meals are just delicious, and with sunny days here, fueling up with Factor there's no prep, there's no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus. Factory's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved, and they're ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always find time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. I cannot tell you guys. We have been working on this studio. We have been doing stuff. And Brett, who is here, if you don't know Brett, Brett is one of the best. He's a producer, and he works on this studio, and he's gotten it looking really, really good. Well, Brett gets hungry. I said, Brett, guess what? I got some good meals for you, and we got Factor. And Brett's been most energy I've seen him running around because he's been eating well with Factor. They have 35 meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, and you'll always have new flavors to explore. You got to treat yourself to restaurant-quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. So if you head to factormeals.com/DTE50, you use that code DTE50, you'll get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code DTE50 at factormeals.com/DTE50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while subscription is active. Get it. You'll thank me for it. I appreciate it. Guys, let me tell you about Joy Mode. So what you don't want to do is, because everybody worries about, oh man, when it comes to whether it's getting older or whether it's just in general with getting in the bedroom. You're like, oh, I don't want to have a bad sex experience. I don't want to do that. But guess what? Gas station pills, you've all been standing around going, oh, those might work. They don't. And you don't want to do the prescriptions either sometimes, man. They got bad results. Feels like a hangover. So the good news is you got Joy Mode. And Joy Mode is safe and it's backed by science. It's like when you go to the gym and you want to have extra electrolytes or whatever it might be, a good kind of workout shake. It's the same thing. You feel good. It has nothing to do with, oh, I can't do it anymore. It has nothing to do with that. It's like, yeah, I'm working out. I'm going to the bedroom. And it works for cardiovascular health. Did you know that? Yes. So it doesn't matter if you're happy or unhappy with what's going on in the bedroom right now. Perform better. Joy Mode Sexual Performance Booster. It's a pre-workout, but it's for sex. It's designed to support that quality down there, guys. The firmness, the sex drive. So these are the game changers. All the ingredients have been assessed in peer-reviewed journals. All the ingredients have been studied and researched in humans. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to do those over-the-counter drugs anymore after doing Joy Mode. Not doing it. So the good news is it's small enough to just put in your wallet. You can take with you on the go. It's the perfect travel companion. If you go to usejoymode.com, you get 20% off with the code DTE at checkout. That's 20% off and free shipping, but use that code DTE at usejoymode.com. It's great sex solved naturally. Do you think with all this other stuff, there's something I saw a text, a friend of mine sent me this text. I don't know if you saw this, the Dave Navarro thing. Did you see this?
I don't think so.
So
I saw he was hanging out with George Knapp recently.
That's what it was. That's what it was.
Oh, okay,
so he posted the picture, and essentially what he said was, thanks to my pals George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell for coming to see us this evening. We talked about some things that I'd love to share, but I'm afraid it's still classified. All I can say to you is that you may not want to make any plans on March 3rd, 2026. Actually, you might not have a choice. Now that's right. That's vague. It's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And does it also set you up for what if nothing happens on that day?
Yeah, it's so specific, isn't it?
It's so specific. And it's like you see like stuff like that. Like I get my hopes up when I see posts like that, but then when nothing happens, I start to get, I don't think skeptical is the right word, because I'll read something like what you wrote and the things that you talk about, I find so fascinating in my, whether it's A, science fiction brain, whether it's B, the idea that I am not smart enough to know quantum physics and want to, those types of things where I love being fascinated by all that. But when I see posts like that from Navarro and other people, I'm like, you better have something real to come out, because you're going to get people are going to start to go, I think you said it once, you get burnt out on it eventually.
Yeah, the predictions is a funny aspect of this. I was just watching this interview with Dan Burrish, who claims to have worked with the J-Rod, taking biological samples and stuff. And, his story is compelling. I'm on the fence, but there's a lot of details in it that seem to indicate that what he's saying is accurate. I don't know, a number of body language cues and things too. But yeah, he made a prediction about 2012. 2012 is come and gone. This is back in the 90s, I think, when this interview took place. So that does tend to delegitimize the other things he said, even if they were true. So I think here's the bottom line. I think a lot of people get the sense that something is coming. You hear it constantly from experiencers too. but when is the question, and what is it? It's something that's seemingly disruptive, but most have the sense that there's sort of going to be some growing pains, and then we'll come out on the other side better as a species. And I sort of echo those sentiments as well. Um, but yeah, when is it going to happen? Like I think it was Eric Weinstein on Joe Rogan or something talking about how him and this other individual are supposed to be taken to be shown these things, and then they kept pushing it back, like, okay, some things haven't materialized the way we thought, and then they're supposed to go, and then eventually he was like, I give up, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. But it almost seems like there's so many things at play that have to align in the right way for this disclosure process, because I think it is all related to happen. And I've said for a long time, I don't think Congress is pushing it. I think they're being pulled along. I
Hmm.
think it's probably these visitors who are structuring the way it's rolled out, or at least making some sort of time frame for how and when it should be rolled out, or their presence disclosed, whatever they might be. But I don't think anybody can really know, because it almost seems like there's so many things happening in different ways that they have to come together in a certain way for this unveiling to occur. So if any one of those is set back in some capacity, then I think maybe it alters the way all those pieces fit together and the way this could be happening. So that's just, I'm not basing that on any information that I have. It's just sort of a feeling, considering that, yeah, we all get the sense we're moving in this direction, but there's so many moving parts that are just sort of jostling for position, that maybe it's hard to make predictions. I certainly wouldn't try to predict anything, but yeah, I don't know, that the Navarro thing's interesting. Is he saying, like, does he have
It
information?
seems like it.
Was there any context?
The only context that I saw of that text was that he's sitting there, he's got his arm around George Knapp, and I assume that he said they had a couple conversations that he can't say and he can't talk about it because it's still classified. But essentially,
Yeah.
hold on to your butts because here it comes. Maybe, and it seems like it's hinted that both Jeremy and George said, that, yeah, wait until you see what happens in the beginning of 2026. Because if you go back to that Soul Foundation presentation and the stuff that with Carl Nell and the other stuff that leaked out, they had that kind of timeline of where they wanted to go, and 2026, 2027, that area was the timeline of where they wanted to eventually hit. So that makes sense. But I wanted to jump
Yeah.
back on something you just said, though, because I'd like to elaborate more, if you don't mind, elaborating a little bit more about what you said about the Congress side of it and the idea, because you talked about it at great length with Ross about your experience and what had happened to you when you were about to quit, and then you had an experience where you believed that these two people who had who and if I jarble any of this, please correct me. But essentially, they were kind of used as a medium for the beings, and telepathically, you were able to communicate with them that they were giving you the message of not to quit, not to keep on going. And is that ultimately what you think is happening within Congress, that side of thing, where it's just like, no, keep pushing, whether it's a Tim Burchett, Luna, Moskowitz, that keep going and push this until it gets, exposed, or something different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, certainly the phenomenon touches people's lives in very specific ways. It seems like if you talk to anyone who's passionate about this question, there's something that sort of prodded them or pushed them into this. Um, I don't know. I kind of get the sense, because I'm certainly not an important person in any capacity. So if they, whoever they are, and again, it's a very open question for me that I'm trying to figure out. So I'm certainly not going to say that I know, but whoever they are, if they're talking to somebody like me who's not really that important, then certainly they're talking to people who are, and I've it's apparently something we're not supposed to talk about. Just these types of experiences, telepathic communication, deep trance mediumship, where people's essentially minds are taken over, pushed aside so something else can come through. But it's important to, it's clearly a part of the equation, and it's happening to a lot of people. I've had a ton of folks reach out since I first talked about this with Jesse Michaels, and then again with Ross recently. So, yeah, I think the more we can talk about all of the weird elements of this, even if we don't understand them, and it's hard for me to talk about something I don't even understand.
Right.
So I always preface it with just, this is what happened. Um, Interpret it however you want. This is the chain of events that occurred, and yeah, information was provided to me. I was very politely asked not to quit doing these types of things yet. They put three things in my brain for some future times. Um, so yeah, I would get the sense that something is pushing these people. I don't know if it's that overt, if they've had contact in this or other ways, but there does seem to be some push to make this happen. Or, maybe it's even coming from a couple people and just sort of working its way down through Congress, through some certain individuals who feel compelled to do this. I don't know. That's a great question. But certainly there are individuals who are pushing hard. Some of it might just be ego too. Like when the door
Right.
slammed in your face and you're told, no, you can't know about this.
Right.
Obviously, you're going to want to know about it.
Of
And
course.
if your ego is hurt in the process, then yeah, you're going to jump on.
Well, and that for sure, and the idea of being the person inside of Congress to you'll be remembered forever. And
Yeah.
if you're the one who pushed it forward, the president that is in the seat when it comes to disclosure, there's going to be the disclosure president forever.
Yeah.
As we go to bed one night, we wake up the next day, it's a completely different world. I mean, so yeah, I mean, of course ego would be involved in it for sure, and that's why I get so frustrated when it started at that hearing. When you listen to everybody come out of it, it was the most bipartisan thing I'd ever heard. It was great.
Yeah, I know. It was
I
crazy.
couldn't believe it. They were talking, the
Yeah.
Democrats talking about, oh, my buddy over on this side and my buddy all over the place, holding hands, kumbaya. And
Yeah.
now
So
because
cool.
yeah, it was great. But now because the election's coming in, it's like, oh well, they're a Democrat, they're not going to get it passed. That Republican, they're the one that's blocking, and it's like, can it ever get pushed forward? And it becomes so frustrating. But to get away from that, I want to get more into the idea because I am fascinated by this stuff, Michael. I'm actually reading. There's this thing that was sent to me. It's like this winning essays of this. I don't know if you've
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah. The Bigelow Institute.
I started. They sent it to me, and I was like, okay, I'm curious about it because I don't know what the hell happens to us when we die. I have no idea. I don't think I'm a very religious person. I certainly am not a person that thinks nothing happens. But if it doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. But this stuff is so fascinating to me because it combines a lot of the stuff that you were talking about. It combines a lot of the stuff where, the
Yeah.
consciousness and I want to ask you a question that I'm sure you get in your normal everyday life, and a simple one. What do you think happens when we go?
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't really thought about it much in relation to UFOs and some recent experiences I've been having, and the telepathy thing and just light and consciousness and energy. But yeah, like you just pointed out, they do seem to be connected in some weird way.
Yeah.
I lost my sister-in-law in 2022,
Sorry.
right around the time that the study was happening that Robert Bigelow funded. He put up, I think, $1 million
Yeah.
for this, and one of the runners-up is a woman named Sharon Hewlett Rowlett, I believe is how you pronounce that, who I just spoke with a couple days ago at length about a lot of this same stuff. She recommended some books that I'm looking forward to diving into, but she was one of the runners up for that essay competition and published a book based on her essay that I read, and was kind of helpful, with the mourning the loss of someone
Yeah.
close, a family member. But it really did get me thinking about like the soul and consciousness, and that term itself is a loaded term, based on Judeo-Christian philosophies. And but I do think, we have to use the words we have. We can't talk about things like you go on an insane mushroom trip or an LSD trip, and there's just no words to describe what you're seeing and feeling and the information coming through. And you come down from that, it's like the screen is erected again, and you just don't have the ability to access the information in the same way. And it kind of seems that way with near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. And you read enough of these, and yeah, you get the sense that this body is just housing something,
Right.
that we're not it. We're not the be all and end all of this existence. A lot of people say, well, when you die, you just die, you go in the ground. Well, your body does. But the thing that we're housing in this body that interestingly is seemingly released with a DMT eruption in the brain. Like I forget his name. He wrote the DMT molecule, Rick
Hmm.
Straussman. But he's like, why is there DMT in our brains? And why is that activated as we're dying? Is it this way of bridging that gap and allowing our soul to be released? But after reading enough of these accounts and sort of having an out of body experience myself, when this telepathic thing happened in Phoenix, like I kind of feel like I was lifted out of my body temporarily and was able to sort of see this timeless consciousness in the place it lives. And I can't help but wonder if that is where we all go or what we come from and where we go again, that we just sort of enter these bodies in various times in various places and then return to source after we can't inhabit them anymore. But that's just kind of my personal worldview based on all these things and that have happened and things I've been reading.
Yeah, my mind goes into a million different places because I don't understand how time and space work. I just don't get it. I don't think anybody really does. And
No.
the idea of where it's, if you believe in, whether it's multiverse or believe in the idea that there's just infinite possibilities of where this, energy can go and quantum physics and all that. But when it comes to these particular craft and looping this all together with this, that there are theories, right? There are theories, whether it's future humans, whether that the technology themselves. I believe that you thought that these things could essentially be time machines.
Mhm.
That there is the idea that some believe that it's interdimensional and not from otherworldly. That some say that there is both otherworldly and interdimension. Because I know that it was a theory from what you were writing about, but in your heart of hearts, do you think that it is most likely future humans who have the ability to time travel, that have this idea that, do they just come to this universe? Do they travel to, do we are other versions of ourselves see these things, know these things are flying around? Is there a universe where it's not even a question of, I always think about that, like maybe there is another version of this universe where these things are flying around constantly. This just happens to be the one where it's all hidden behind everything and people don't want to reveal it. And that could be my science fiction brain. I have no idea. But do you have an idea of what you ultimately, really, heart of hearts, think that these things in the sky are?
Yeah, well, it's tough because I've kind of become one of the main advocates for this time travel theory, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing I think is happening. I'm often pigeonholed in that way, and it's quite frustrating because I've said from the beginning, there's a lot of variation. We can't account for all of this variation with one theory. We also can't approach it with just one field of study. That's why on my first book, the subtitle is a multidisciplinary approach, because I think we need to bring in all of the different fields of science to understand this and also recognize that there is probably more than one thing happening. I am, people used to ask me, like, what percentage would you assign to this future human theory? And I was usually around at the beginning 60, 70%. I'm up to about
Wow.
95% on it being a part of it. I certainly don't think it explains all of it, but I'm almost completely convinced. And I always leave, a space for some new evidence to come in and prove me wrong. And as scientists, we are open to that. We want to be proved wrong. I mean, our egos, if they get in the way, don't want to be proved
Right.
wrong. But as scientists, that's what we're supposed to do: is take all the information and make an inference to the best explanation. And based on everything I've studied over most of my life in doing this, I'm pretty convinced that that is part of it. So yeah, I would put the extra tempestural model in there as some component of what's happening. But yeah, there's just other things that are hard to really pin down. And then, like we were just talking about, when you add in the consciousness component, aspects of souls and sort of soul contracts that some people talk about,
Yeah.
just all of these things seem to indicate that there's a lot to this reality we don't yet understand. But the more we can kind of talk about it and explore it, ask questions, talk about the odd things that happen, the weird things we see in the sky, our abduction experiences, those are probably one of the best things we can learn from. And why I wrote my second book, to really kind of just break down the different types of abductions. It covers 90 years over 5 continents and looks at sort of common patterns that we can pull out of those, what we might be able to learn from those patterns, and bringing in the science to maybe help understand some of the nuances of these cases. But these are the people that had the most intimate contact, and based on the behaviors of the beings they interact with, we can learn a lot from not just their physical appearance, but what they're doing, maybe why they're doing it, where, when they come from. And
Yeah.
yeah, even questions like interdimensionality, the way they manipulate space time. I think those all give us clues as to maybe also how we don't understand time, like you
Right.
said.
Yeah.
We know it exists. We know it's an emergent property of something more fundamental, but we don't understand what that is. And until we meld quantum mechanics and general relativity, we might not be able to know. But clearly, they figured it out. They can manipulate space time in and around these crafts. So, by taking them seriously and potentially looking at them as time machines, or trying to understand how they're manipulating space time and what that does for them and how they use it, we might be able to sort of crack the code, get some information from our future to help us now to unravel these things to the point where it will eventually be us in that future helping our past selves figure it out. So there's these potential loops that might exist connecting our past, present, and future.
And I'm sure there's an answer. I mean, obviously, there's always an answer for it, because it's always, you get people who don't pay attention. And I shouldn't say not pay attention, but maybe don't, like the casual person walking down the street getting their groceries, and you bring this subject up to them, they're going to look at you like you have 3 heads on your shoulders, right?
Yeah.
But in that same person will probably say, well, why don't they just show themselves? Why don't they just show? Why don't they just show themselves? If that's the case, if they're future humans and they want to help us out and they don't want us to blow ourselves up with their nukes and everything too, why don't they just show ourselves? And I'm sure there's more intricate answer to that in general, whether, like you said, they're communicating telepathically, they have certain missions of certain places they want people to know about it, but doing it in their own way. But what would your answer be to someone who's just like, well, why don't they just show up now, tell us, here's the deal, we're able to travel back, we know that this is coming, we don't want it to come, so use this.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think there's a couple different answers that might overlap. The first I would say is partly because of what you just said, that people don't talk about time. We don't understand time. It, it was St. Augustine, I think, that said time is the most used word in our language, but we don't understand what it is. And that's true today too. And then you have movies like Back to the Future that really convolute what time and backward time travel might mean and what implications there might be for that. So yeah, I think part of the roadblock is just that we don't understand it and we don't understand the implications of it. And that might be a part of why they're not overtly interjecting themselves yet. It seems like if it is future humans leading this push to allow disclosure to happen or to force disclosure to happen, that we might be going to that point where they are going to reveal themselves, and there might be some time frame to do that. Others, like you had mentioned, and just a little bit ago, there might be things about time that we don't understand that could complicate the way it affects us. So I've approached this from the block universe model in both my first 2 books because it's the main theory to explain how time would work connecting different points in it. So in the block universe theory, all moments exist,
Right.
past, present, future, everything. And when you go back in time, you're not changing anything. You're just doing what you had always done in that moment. And you come back to the present and everything's the same
Mhm.
because you just went and fulfilled that obligation at that time. Those moments are intricately linked, there's self consistency among them. So it doesn't change anything. But then you do also have the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, where if you went back and just entering the past itself would create a bifurcation. You have this branching timelines, and then
Mhm.
there's all of these other realities, and that's a less held theory about the way time and space works, but it's out there, so we have to consider that too. And I did more in my second book. So yeah, there could be ramifications to them acknowledging their presence. It could, that the big one was always that it would cause mass panic ever since
Yeah.
H.G.
Yeah.
Wells's book, The War of the Worlds broadcast. But I don't think so. I heard someone say Actually, it might have been that Dan Burish interview. I think he was talking about Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, where he's like, we send these 18-year-old kids to die on the beaches of Normandy. Like, that's not more shocking than learning about UFOs,
Right.
whether they be from outer space or from time or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, it's intuitive that we would see this thing coming from the sky and say, oh, that's from outer space. That's easy to understand. Saying they're humans from the future coming back to do these things covertly, like you're
Hmm.
talking about, you know, why not reveal themselves? I think that it's harder to wrap your head around, but it's not like it's going to completely explode our minds if we do learn that.
Right.
I mean, we are able to deal with pretty traumatic situations and complex situations. So I think we're getting to the point where we can understand it. We can we're close enough to them maybe in time and with regard to the evolution of our consciousness and understanding of technology that we could potentially be let in on this secret. And it seems like that might be happening. But the last thing I'll say is that it also might be that they were doing this covertly for so long because of them, because of something
Right.
they needed from us. It seemingly centers on gamete extraction, that they need our DNA for something that serves them, and they're doing it quietly, not to be disruptive, almost like the Prime Directive in Star Trek. They're getting what they need to save themselves, and the way it affects people in this time may be just a latent effect of that sort of friendly fire in a sense. They don't want to disrupt us. Seemingly, they do care for us, and a lot of the people that are taken have a sense of love and light and these benevolent beings.
Hmm.
So maybe, you know, they finished with that. And now it's getting to the point where all of these can kind of come together. They can explain
Right.
who they are, when they're coming from, why they're doing these things. And we might be at a point where we can finally understand it.
This episode of Down to Earth with Kristian Harloff is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let me ask you, what are your self-care non-negotiables? What is it, that you never skip a leg day or therapy day? Because when your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Because even when we know what makes us happy, it is hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Therapy is very important. I've been in that position, man, when I haven't talked and I've let things bottled up, and it is not a good thing. You got to talk to people. And we've had people on our show that have said, listen, we've needed to speak to people. We had an opportunity to, and BetterHelp has been there for a lot of people very close in my life. Because if you don't know, it's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, it is flexible, and it is suited to your schedule. All you have to do is you fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you switch therapists anytime, no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. You got to visit betterhelp.com/DTE today. You get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/DTE. So, I mean, yeah, it's a mind-blowing thing when you hear it described
It
that
is,
way,
yeah.
but it's also in the idea where if you look at it from all the time, because we as a species, especially now, we go, well, yeah, look, it's only been happening since 1947, and that's clearly not the case. It's just the first case that we've really maybe started to pay attention to, or maybe that's when they started showing themselves, when they realized they're just going to be close enough before we blow ourselves up. And if you look at all the stuff that had happened in the past, the stuff that the other idea I think could be, well, yeah, they've been here before we were. So they've been here doing this thing on this planet, jumping back and forth and going and exploring all of it, that they've seen the evolution of it. And if you look at it, it's been, over 2,000 years or wait, more. For us, it's and if you look
Yeah.
at everything that thousands upon thousands of years they've been observing humans, that the idea of, okay, look, this is the time. We're finally going to do it. We've been watching you guys for 10, however long it's been. Um, it's just the stuff you're talking about with time, the way that time works and time travel, and the idea of, because I did always have the idea when I look at Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies of all time, but it drives me crazy when it comes to time travel because of all the,
Me too.
it drives me crazy. Like all the different things of like, yeah, well, first of all, he wouldn't be in that same exact situation scenario with Doc and the two pines at the very end. It'd be a totally different reality. And it's just the
Yeah.
time travel nerd in me. Did you ever see Arrival?
Yeah, I did recently. Great movie. Yeah.
Did you because and I felt that of all the stuff that I've read and the things of hearing people like yourself talk about it and the idea of consciousness going into that place where she goes to at the end, to me that to this day has been the most realistic
Yeah.
presentation of what I think time travel could be if you could present consciousness in a different time. Did you get that?
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's a great great movie to bring up right now too, because it also demonstrates or at least indicates a potential response from us to this thing that we
Right.
don't understand. We just assume it's dangerous and has weapons and it's more advanced than us, so it's going to kill us, and we start fighting about it. But then, yeah, you find out. I guess we should probably add a spoiler alert here, but
Yeah.
you find out that they're time travelers essentially, and they see all time, kind of like in the Slaughterhouse-Five, Kurt
Mm-hmm.
Vonnegut's book,
Yep.
where the Traumadorians or whatever they're called, like see all time. They know the future. They know how they're going to die, but they can't change it because the moments are structured that way. And I think that's a good way of looking at time and time travel too. I always advocate that people watch a show called Dark
Oh, I
on
love that show.
Netflix. Yeah,
Love Dark.
fantastic.
Loved
First
that
first
show.
two seasons especially
Yep.
really adhere to the block universe model. I had good fortune to meet one of the writers for that show and hang out with them a little bit, pick their brain about things. But yeah, it's there are ones that are done well, but there's a lot that are done poorly. And
Yeah.
and after writing a science fiction novel about time travel, I really got an insider's view on why that is, because you can kind of back yourself into a corner where it's like, well, shit, what do I do here?
Right.
And then, but then, oh, I'll just make it a multiverse, or there's different, or you can change the past. There's different timelines. Then you can write yourself out of that. And I sort of try to take the opposite approach, where I made it seem like there's different realities, but then at the end of the book, this is a bit of a spoiler too, but it was just kind of a fun thing I did for myself. I made it seem like there's all these different possibilities, but then in the end, they find out there was one,
Mm.
and they were just doing what they were always going to do, thinking they were doing something different, finding out that there was self-consistency inherent in all of their actions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I understand it, I get it, but yeah, movies like Arrival, Dark, I think even it's been a while since I've seen it, but like the Atom Project
Yeah.
seemingly tried to some extent to
Yeah.
kind of keep things consistent. But it takes effort, and it takes a knowledge of time and the principle of self consistency in order to be able to really adhere to that. But it is challenging in writing the story.
I'm sure it is, and that's why I get more fascinated when it comes to theories like the one that you presented, when it comes to what these things potentially could be, and whether it's bending time and space, and then the other side of it is this whole water, the under the ocean part of it.
Yeah.
I don't know where you stand with this in general, but as I mentioned, well, it seems like, and I don't know, they haven't announced anything yet, but it seems like Luna and Burchett are really pushing for this next hearing to really focus a lot on the USOs and to really focus on this. When I didn't even know a lot about it until I had both Darcy Weir and Tim Gallaudet on the show, and they just really told me all these different things that were happening under there, and the idea, and it makes all the sense in the world. If you had this kind of technology that could travel under the ocean, why wouldn't you do that when it's like, how much of the ocean underneath do we really know about? 3%?
Yeah.
So what's your overall theories, ideas about these things going underwater, being underwater? Do you think that a lot of their bases are underwater? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I have to wonder, certainly, and especially because they do seemingly try to hide themselves.
Mm-hmm.
If if they were coming from another planet, based on how often we see UFOs, there should be some sort of super highway, or we constantly see them coming and going. I had a quote in my second book by Steve Mira in the UK arguing that same thing. Like they're constantly seen. So if they are extraterrestrial, why don't we see them always coming in and out of our atmosphere? But yeah, they're under the oceans. They're popping in and out of our existence, our four-dimensional place in space-time, which also indicates that they might be time machines, because that's exactly what we'd expect to see.
Yeah.
That something materializes in our four-dimensional reference frame and then dematerializes as it moves in and out of time. Um, So yeah, if they are here, and it also makes sense, if they're traveling back in time, and we listed this as one of the potential explanations for the crypto terrestrial model in this paper we published in June, where if they're coming either from outer space or through time, and they're doing something here that's a multi-decade process related to extracting sperm from males and eggs from females, then why not build something here in this time to facilitate those activities?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of indications there's something on the far side of the moon. It's very suspicious that we haven't been back there since I think 1972. There was all this talk of colonizing the moon and making these bases, and there was an international collaboration. We were working closely with the Russians to do this. They had their own program, collaborating despite the Cold War. And then all of a sudden we stopped. But there, you read Ingo Swann's book Penetration, the other remote viewers who have also indicated this. A lot of contactees are taken to a base on the moon. They know they're on the moon. So yeah, the ocean would certainly be a possibility too. Potentially some remote mountains and rural areas would be a good place to sequester yourself. So I think it makes sense that if they are coming here, whether they be extraterrestrial or extraterrestrial, that they would set up a base. These massive triangular craft that are always described. Terry Lovelace
Hmm.
mentions this in his book Incident Devil's Den. Countless others do. The Phoenix Lights were likely one of these huge black triangular craft. That's not something that could probably pop in and out of time. I think it's these cylindrical saucer-shaped craft that are the actual time machines. But you could build something like that and hide it in the oceans on the far side of the moon, and just bring it out when you need it. I refer to it as a excuse me, a floating fertility facility, because these are seemingly the ones where people were taken, um, stripped naked, marched through these corridors, taken in these rooms, sperms extracted, sent back, put back to bed. But that's not something that I think you could just bring in and out of time. I think it's constructed here, and if so, you need a base, you need materials, you need workers to construct this thing and pilot it and take care of all of those operations. And that's something that I think could easily be done because, yeah, only I forget the number too. I think it might be a little higher, like 7 or 8% of our oceans have been explored, but there's so much of it we don't know about, we can't see. And yeah, protections have been put in place to keep people from really going to the far side of the moon, photographing it. And I think there's a reason for that.
What
That
do
I
you,
think they are sequestering themselves here on this planet in this time and over the last 70 plus years.
well, what do you think that is? Also, you think because there's these rumors and speculations that clearly there are people that are in communication with these things, and that somebody is in communication from our side, if you say, that are like, don't travel to the moon anymore. Okay, we'll make sure that doesn't happen. In the same way, bringing back, because I'll kind of loop this into one question to what you said before about one of the reasons that that they were scared that, or they weren't doing disclosure because they're afraid that the population would be scared about it. And then you had said it. There's these things, people going off to war and fighting, and they can't handle things about UFOs. I think, and David Grush brought this up at Rogan, and I believe it 100%, that one of the main reasons that they're not disclosing anything is the amount of people that would go to jail and the amount of lawsuits that would happen and the amount of the ideas
Yeah.
and the things that would happen inside of that. And the other thing that I believe, to my core of the reason why, is because society would change overnight, in whether it's energy, in whether it's religion, whether it's these different things. It would change overnight. Belief in the idea, if there were these things that were presented to the population of like, well, no, this is what you're actually capable of. Well, then why the hell am I going to my job at 9 to 6 when I know that if I actually study, I can remote view, I can do this, I can learn how to do this, I can,
Yeah.
if I study enough and I'm actually given the opportunity, I can learn how to time travel, I can do this. Like, the world would change, the energy would change if you knew exactly where you went and what happened after death, and you didn't like your life. God forbid what would happen. So there's a lot of crazy things, but I think that, to go back to what I was, initially saying in the beginning of that, was that when you see all that and you hear all that stuff, do you believe that there's more contact with them and us that we let on to acknowledge?
Yeah, I do. You know, it obviously borders on conspiracy theory when you start talking about how the government's involved
Sure.
with these craft and whether there's contracts that were made and agreements that were forged. But if you hear it enough and you hear it from people like David Grush, who is seemingly very deeply involved and had access to things a lot of us don't, then you do have to at least keep it on the table as a possibility. And yeah, I would tend to think that that is likely the case. Some sort of interaction, and then again, not just Terry Lovelace, but others have described uh, people in military uniforms, current military garb, that are working closely with these others and their various forms and different types on the same ship. Whitley Strieber describes four different types, where seemingly the taller, more insect-like forms with a very advanced consciousness are in charge, and that they seemingly have characteristics of a highly advanced form of hominin, a
Hmm.
modern human projected forward to the extent that our consciousness develops, our brains get larger, our faces get smaller. All of these trends that I focus on primarily in my first book as being indicative of what we would look like in the future. They have the extended version of those characteristics. But yeah, I do think we're working with them. I think we have been for a while, possibly going back to the 40s. And there's a lot of reasons why we would. We could benefit tremendously from the things that we can learn about the technology in our deep future. It gives us a window into what we will be using and how we will be using it. And yeah, like you said, it would be extremely disruptive if they have seemingly endless energy supplies, like zero point energy, for instance, what that would do to our fossil fuel, solar, wind, all of the seemingly primitive ways that we extract energy from the environment in ways that are harming this planet.
Right.
And you can understand why they would care about that if they're stakeholders in this planet, if they inherit it from us and we're decimating it because we're relying on sources of energy that are changing the biome, the planet itself, the climate. Yeah, you could certainly see why they would want to change things to make a better future for us, but also a better present for them. But in the process, it would, yeah, it would be extremely disruptive. I hadn't really thought about, the aspect of people who if this is revealed and some elements of it do involve understanding who we are as conscious entities in these bodies, and then suddenly if you're aware that, yeah, there's endless happiness and joy being reunited with source consciousness, and my life sucks here, I'm miserable,
Right.
what are you going to do?
Right.
You're going to go back to source. So yeah, I'd never considered that, but there could be, yeah, mass suicides, people just checking out.
I'm sure there would be if you knew the actual,
Yeah,
and if you're the government, that's on your hands. And
exactly.
so, I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot more that goes into it. That it's like, of course, as human beings, we want to know, yeah, what's the truth? What's the truth? And it's like the old, the Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth. And it's like
yeah,
maybe that's the case. And there's certain aspects where we want to believe in so much, we want to know all the truths, but it's like whatever the real truths are, I don't know, but it's so fascinating, and I'm so curious. But before I let you go, a couple other things I wanted to ask you is that when it comes to these things and how they're traveling, whether it's wormholes, portals, and all of that, do you believe that if they are indeed going through wormholes, going through portals, what kind of effect does that have in time and space? Would you imagine?
yeah. That's, I don't know. I get the sense that they're not using wormholes simply because, well, a couple of reasons. One, based on Kip Thorne's description and his grad students who helped him out a lot with this theory, you would need some sort of infinitely massive or infinitely energetic thing to prop open the wormhole itself. They call it exotic matter because it doesn't exist as far as we know. Um, and then even that, because it would almost be like a singularity in a black hole, how would you go through that to push it open, but then to have infinite energy and mass to expand this thing to go through? I don't know. And the other thing I think the other reason I think they're not using wormholes is they seemingly just appear and disappear wherever they want.
Right.
If there was a wormhole, and how would that wormhole not suck us in if
Hmm.
it also can bend space and time to the extent that you can connect two highly disparate regions of the universe in order to travel across both time and especially space, then why wouldn't it just suck everything in its vicinity? So I don't know the whole idea of portals. Maybe there's something to that, but I think these craft are the actual time machine. They seemingly have characteristics indicative what we say in biology, the form follows function. They seemingly have a form consistent with the function of manipulating space-time. And I list a number of cases in my second book where time passes at different rates in the vicinity of these craft. And that's been showed actually in the Travis Walton case, where in the region where he was taken, the trees right around where that ship was grew at a much faster rate than the trees even 20 yards away. Linda Jones, she's running and the grass is growing rapidly under her feet. Corporal Armando Valdez in the 70s in Chile disappears for 15 minutes from his men, but was gone for 5 days based on his beard growth, and his watch read 5 days in the future, too. So I think it's the craft doing it. In my first book, we don't know what time is. We don't know how to backward time travel yet, but I listed a number of solutions to Einstein's field equations that he published in association with his 1915 paper on general relativity. And those solutions, almost instantly with Lenson theory, and just 2 years later, show that the rotation of a massive or highly energetic ring, sphere, or disk can cause frame dragging and allow for backward time travel because they allow light cones to bend over. So you're still moving forward in time locally, but you're going into the global past. And from Gödel, Van Stockham, and then Tipler in the 1970s especially showed how if you shrink all of that down to a disk shape, spin it fast enough with the right energy and rotation parameters, that you can create a time machine. And that's what these disk-shaped UFOs are. They're disks. They're rapidly spinning disks. So I think you just take all that together, and it seems to point to these, at least the disc-shaped ones, being the time machines that allow them to do this without the need for any sort of wormhole or portal per se.
Right. So, and that brings me to my last question, and something that you were talking about, where if you look at the way the time potentially could work, where even if you go back, you do whatever you have to do, you still have to do that thing in order to make, you're not changing anything. You're just basically putting everything in place that was supposed to be.
Yeah.
So the rumors, or not rumors, the speculations have been over time that these things have essentially been left as gifts, right? That these things sometimes, like, well, how do they crash? If there's such great technology, how do they crash? And a lot of people have said, well, they were left as gifts. Is there a possibility here? Let's go with that theory that they're gifts, that they have to be left as gifts, because if there's the future humans without those gifts, we're not going to figure out how to do time travel. So we need to drop a few of them to ourselves to study them. It's going to take us years upon years upon years to figure out how to do it. Hence the programs that they have, the reverse engineering that has been reported to be, that Grush and all these other people talk about. Is that what they're doing there? They're trying to make this thing work so the future humans will eventually be able to exist, and that's why, here you go, here's a gift. Now make sure that we exist. Do your work.
Yeah, no, and I've heard so many people seemingly get so close to that, where they're like, oh, well, we have these things, we're figuring out how they work, and if we keep doing that, we're going to be the ones using these things. And if they are time machines, then we are going to be the ones time traveling in them. And yeah, I used to give the example of the Roswell crash and the context of what's called the bootstrap paradox, which isn't a paradox at all. It just confuses our fragile sensibilities as they relate to linear time. But basically, if this craft, say it came from 20,000 years in the future, crashes into the Roswell desert, the desert just outside of Roswell in 1947, and we start to reverse engineer it, and we eventually figure out how to make this thing and go on to become the ones that travel from 20,000 years in the future back to 1947 and crash outside of Roswell again. The thing that's seemingly paradoxical is who created it. We always want to have this past cause and a future effect. We want to say, well, that person thought of that thing and it created this thing at a later date. But you don't have that in this closed, self-consistent loop of space-time connecting these two disparate points on the block universe. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that there's not a creator. I say it's like trying to find the corner of a ball. It doesn't exist, and it doesn't matter because that's not the shape. And so you can have this situation where no, the people in the past didn't create it because it was gifted to them or crashed, and then they figured out how it works. People in the future didn't necessarily create it either because it was the reverse engineering of that thing that crashed that led to the creation of that device. But it doesn't matter that there's no creator. Those moments in time and all of the ramifications of that crash and the creation of this thing are all connected in this highly elaborate system of time loops. So yeah, I certainly think that's a possibility. And I think you phrased it really well too, that they almost maybe need to interject those things in order to ensure their own existence or their own ability to go back and do this. And was that a conscious decision? Was it one person or a group of people that sat down and said, all right, let's go crash this thing? I don't think so. I don't think anyone would sign up to go do that. Some of them are certainly accidents, but yeah, the ones that are gifted are really interesting to me. And then there's issues that arise too about, are you picking certain nations over others? Are you picking certain cultural or ethnic groups over others if you gift technology here but not here? What does that mean if we reverse engineer some of these and use it for war? Or are you creating this
Right.
imbalance in the geopolitical environment? So yeah, I think it gets really tricky, not in the sense of how it could work or paradoxes that might arise, but how it might affect socioeconomic relations, geopolitical relations, and just the creation of these technologies. Who's going to be using them in the future? And I've actually had a few people reach out to me who have said they were taken onto these ships and they were allowed to sit down with people who introduced themselves as future humans, but said, going back to something we talked about much earlier in the conversation, that one of the reasons they don't overtly reveal themselves is because they don't want people to think that if they see individuals with Asian characteristics, for instance, which is very common, they see people with light skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, they don't want us in these times to have maybe a false sense of who is successful in the future and
Okay.
who might be more advanced technologically and be capable of these things. So they sort of just try to hide themselves, and keep from really interjecting themselves too much into any individual time, because we would start to take that information, extrapolate, and
Sure.
it could potentially cause wars. And
Well,
so I don't
yeah.
know. There's a lot of things involved, but it's yeah, it's all just
It's
I
fascinating.
don't know.
It's absolutely
Yeah,
fascinating. And
it hurts my brain.
I'm
I've been
sure
thinking
it
about this
does.
most of my life, and
I'm
it
sure
still
it
hurts
does. I
sometimes.
can't imagine this is what you do. I can't imagine it. And so this is the last one for you then. Do you think then in our lifetime, do we get disclosure of what's really going on? And if so, how long before that happens?
Yeah, well, I'd be contradicting myself if I try to give a time frame on that, because I just said I don't think we should make predictions. But my felt sense is that yes, I do think the way these things have been happening and the speed with which they've been happening more recently would seem to indicate that we're on track to know. Um, Whether that comes with some sort of highly disruptive event or events, whether it's tied to some cataclysm or a massive shift in consciousness or a complete breakdown of the way we perceive time and experience time, I don't know. But yeah, to your question, I do think that we're on track to know within our lifetimes. Obviously we could die tomorrow, so I
Right.
would be wrong
Right.
by, by saying that
Within
if
the average
if
of
we're
when we're
both dead
yeah.
tomorrow. But the average person's lifetime, from
Right.
we're young, spry lads. We're
Yeah.
probably in our 20s or
It's right.
30s.
That's exactly right.
Or I like to pretend like I am, at least. But yeah, I would say our lifetime would be what, maybe 50, 60, 70 years if we're lucky. And I think it's going to be much sooner than that, honestly. Contradicting myself, not wanting to put any predictions out there. I think it'd probably be within the next 5 to 10.
Wow. I mean, that seems to be on point with what a lot of people are saying. So, It's
Yeah, John Ramirez
yeah.
too. I think he mentioned 2027 as well
2027 was what, yeah,
specifically.
is what he said, and then I think in that area from where, again, bringing up the Soul Foundation and everything else, that was the time period, and then looking at what we said with Navarro, what they said with 2026, what's coming then. So who knows? But I can tell you that I was absolutely fascinated with this conversation. Very excited that you were able to join me today. I'm very thankful that you were here today. I really appreciate it. So if the people wanted to go grab your books, they can go on Amazon, I assume. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I always advocate for people to buy them from brick and mortar stores
Okay.
just because they took a hit during COVID, but have sort of rebounded. I make a lot less money that way, but I still like to support bookstores because I think they're instrumental for our society. But yeah, otherwise, all the online retailers have them, and I've got a website too with
Okay.
some links to those. I don't really update it as
I'll put
much.
that in the description. So they want to go, they can go through there.
Cool. Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, it's been great talking to you as well. I actually watched some of your stand up
Oh,
recently
did you really?
too, just the other day. It was great. I
Oh,
really
thanks,
enjoyed
man.
it.
I appreciate
I
that.
was yeah, no, it was super cool, and I love your show too. So yeah, keep on keeping on.
Thank you so much. And I will look forward to talking to you again. Appreciate it.